Following the end of the cloning production during the early years of the Galactic Empire, a vast recruitment campaign spread across the galaxy searching for regular humans to fill the ranks of the rapidly growing Imperial Army, Navy, and Officer Corps. While initially most of the early recruits came from planetary security forces and private enforcement agencies, the Empire quickly came to encourage all of its citizens to join its military, including its youngest. This was done with the establishment of Imperial academies across its countless worlds, with separate junior academies for its youth. For the most backwater and underdeveloped planets, these Imperial academies were the only opportunity the human inhabitants had in hopes of leaving their impoverished lives and learning skills beyond farming and mining, a common trade for many living on these worlds. As a result, families would send their children to these junior academies in hopes of giving them better lives and to do their duty of serving the new empire, with a few cases of children joining on their own or even against their parents' wishes. While the primary purpose of these academies was to train future soldiers, pilots, and officers, some also provided education for non-military careers. Data management, starship engineering, medical science, galactic history, journalism, and various other skills were also taught. With some exceptions, most of the non-military careers undertaken by graduates tended to pay less and came with fewer perks when compared to their peers that served directly in the Empire's war machine. Most attendees that initially came to the academies seeking basic education were strongly encouraged to take courses for military career paths. Those who attended junior academies stayed for 1 to a couple years depending on their age of admission. By the age of 16, they were then transferred to a senior Imperial Academy to further their education and training. At the junior academies, cadets were required to live on its premises during their attendance. The experiences of these children and young teens during their stay varied depending on where they were located. But in general, nearly all junior academies sought to weed out the weak through physical tests, teach history and current events, instill loyalty, and prepare cadets for their chosen careers for when they would graduate to the senior academies. The history lessons given ranged from detailed descriptions of battles of the Clone Wars to the politics of the former Republic. Of course, these lessons were always taught with the purpose of undermining the Republic and shining light on the Empire's method of governance. Jedi involvement in the battles of the Clone Wars was rarely mentioned, with credit of their victories given to the admirals or generals instead. Current events, on the other hand, taught cadets of relevant news taking place within or near their planets, with the Empire always painted in a positive manner. Sports and other recreational activities were common at junior academies, with gravball being among the most popular. Both mental and physical examinations were given which dictated the career paths cadets could pursue following their graduations, with those who failed too often being kicked out. The strictness of these examinations was not equal across the academies, however. For example, the Junior Academy on Ariadu was noted for its very laid-back attitude when it came to training cadets, with the instructors passing everyone who attended and going out of their way to treat them well. This was largely due to the low enrollment of new cadets it received each year, as a result of the sparse population of nearby settlements. In contrast, the Junior Academy on Lothal was uniquely harsh and unforgiving, with cadets made to undergo extreme physical tests such as those that took place within the Well, and it was common for each year to have multiple dropouts. Depending on the region of the galaxy, some junior academies were focused mainly on producing future Stormtroopers and Imperial Army personnel. This was usually the case within the Outer Rim regions and planets with active rebel activity. By the time of graduation, most cadets were transferred to a senior academy within their system, while a select few were allowed to attend prestigious academies if they were at the top of their class. At the senior Imperial academies, cadets were placed in specialized training to become either stormtroopers, TIE pilots, deck officers, or other personnel for the military, with some overlap of training involving everyone across the different classes. From the age of 16, cadets typically attended these academies until they reached 18 or 19, in which case they would either graduate and start their service shortly afterwards, or be accepted for further training at elite academies like the Skystrike Academy. When it came to aspiring young stormtroopers, they received among the harshest physical training when compared to their officer and pilot counterparts. Most of their education was centered around battle tactics, as well as lessons of past military campaigns. Stormtrooper training was quite similar to that of past clones, where their individualities were broken down and replaced to view themselves as only a single piece of a larger fighting force. They were all given operating numbers, which their instructors typically referred to them with during their training, rather than their given names. Additionally, loyalty tests were among the strictest, with stormtroopers being taught to view the Empire as their new home, and the worlds they came from as simply a small cog of the galaxy. They were also trained to remove their emotions when dealing with unlawful citizens, viewing them as inferiors who deserve cruel treatment. In one case, a friend of Zer Leonis trained to become a stormtrooper on Lothal. Upon his graduation, Zer was barely able to recognize his friend, who had been turned into a completely different person, one that was now indifferent to the harm he caused and simply followed orders without question. Interestingly enough, some stormtrooper classes had a sense of superiority among its cadets when comparing themselves to the past clone troopers. When the Ghost crew, along with Captain Rex, boarded a damaged Imperial vessel, they came across a few cadets stationed aboard. One of them later proclaimed that he was going to be a superior soldier as a stormtrooper than any clone trooper was, right to Captain Rex's face after finding out that he deserted the Empire and was a rebel, an opinion he held even after failing to capture the rebels in hopes of receiving a reward from his superior. When it came to Imperial officers and pilots, their training was far less harsh and dehumanizing when compared to stormtroopers. Those that attended the prestigious Royal Imperial Academy on Coruscant received some of the best education in the entire galaxy. Along with access to amenities that would be considered luxurious to other academies, attendees of the Royal Academy were also given a lot of recreational time to befriend one another, as well as to explore Coruscant, which was a dream experience to cadets that came from off-world. Although relationships were forbidden among cadets, they were allowed to date those not in the academy. Despite these more relaxed rules, there were a few unique obstacles to cadets at the Royal Academy. For one, it was perhaps the most politicized academy among the ruling elite, with powerful families typically bribing or strong-arming instructors to give their children favors. In some cases, cadets who excelled but came from poor backgrounds were sabotaged, so they would not stay ahead of their more privileged peers. Another thing that was possibly unique to the Royal Academy was the culture of core world superiority shared by most cadets, viewing those that came from the mid and outer rim as inferiors. This mindset was so apparent that some higher-ups purposely manipulated events to keep cadets that came from the same backwater worlds to distrust one another and undermine their standings. While academics were prioritized at the Royal Academy, cadets were still required to maintain peak physical condition, which they were tested on through a course known as the Sky Loop, a running track which looped around the entire campus. The dropout rate among cadets was exceptionally high, as standards for grades increased for each new exam, with it not being uncommon for half the class being kicked out every year. Despite this, those that made it to graduation were given among the best positions the Empire had to offer. The top students of each class were invited to attend a party at the Imperial Palace on Empire Day, where the most powerful Imperials and Royals were known to attend, including at one point Princess Leia of Alderaan. Cadets that were invited were encouraged to dress their best and to make as many connections as possible. While some did this in hopes of aiding their future careers, other cadets were known to get completely wasted and simply enjoy the party. Although on average Imperial officer training was less harsh to that of stormtroopers, there was one academy where that was not the case. The isolated Arcanus Academy trained aspiring officers, but had a brutal reputation that resulted in its cadets being killed, either through encouragement of its instructors or through accidents in unapproved live-fire training simulations. This was where Zer Leonis attended after graduating from the Junior Academy on Lothal. Much of the brutality of Arcanus came from its commandant, Brendel Hux, the father of Armitage Hux. Brendel had a very unorthodox view of how to train officers, wishing to instill loyalty and cruelty within them that was so extreme that his methods were banned from Imperial High Command, so he had to carry many of them out in secret. His methods included forcing cadets to assassinate one another as a test, with them only passing if they did not get caught. He also had them train using live rounds where cadets were known to be killed. The high death rate of his cadets was usually recorded as accidents, but nonetheless the Empire ultimately sent a team to investigate his academy. At one point he brought his cadets to watch a defenseless animal be mauled to death by a predator, showing them the natural order of things where strength trampled all else. Cadets that disobeyed or resisted his training methods were often tortured or brainwashed into compliance, with some being sentenced to death by him. something extremely rare to happen to cadets of other academies, but was common on Arcanus. Brendel's motivation was to train a new generation of leaders and soldiers that would be equal to and perhaps surpass the discipline and talents of the former clone army. He was also known to take cadets that were force sensitive and personally house them for the Inquisitors to teach them the ways of the dark side, either through corruption or torture if they resisted. Overall, the childhood and teenage years of aspiring Imperials at the junior academies was usually tame, especially when compared to the upbringing clones their age had on Camino. Only later would older teens training to become Stormtroopers at the senior academies face similar treatments to that of clones, while for older teens that trained to become pilots and officers, their treatment was far better, with them being given far more freedom for recreation time, as well as far less intensive physical training, with the exception of those unfortunate enough to attend the Arcanus Academy.